Hi guys, Assalamu alaikum. My thing got caught. Welcome to a new episode of Mumdane. This is episode 5, and I actually had a bunch of moms message me telling me that they did not know what sensitive periods were, so I thought we'd just do that again this week as well. And I just thought we'd take a more in-depth version, a more in-depth angle into what sensitive periods are. So like last week, I'm going to have to ask you guys to tilt your screen so that it's going to be easier for me when I upload it online, so things get a bit more clearer. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So I thought we'd first start with a small recap as to what sensitive periods are. And so essentially, as I discussed the week before that, last session. So sensitive periods are essentially a period of psychological growth for the child. So in this period, a child is more prone to absorbing things faster, better, and with a much better, clearer outcome in the child's development, and they grasp things so much easier. So this period does not last for too long, and once it's gone, you don't know if it's going to come back. So basically, that's what I covered last session, but that's what I wanted to elaborate on again this session, because there is a breakdown as to what Maria Montessori, studied with her children, and I thought that would be really informative to share with you guys, being moms. So I have my notes over here, and so the child has a tendency to build up basic human characteristics, as is normal, as we have all understood, having interacted with children and having had kids of our own. We understand that the child does tend to evolve as a human. But it's not as simplistic as that. There is a whole lot that goes underneath, even when a child is a newborn. So you have sensitive periods for spoken language, but there is no sensitive period for written language, because written language is not a basic human characteristic. It's something that was developed by man later on for an effective mode of communication when people aren't there, when people aren't around. So the sensitive period lasts for spoken language, but then now children do have a tendency to show interest in writing. It's something that evolved later on, but it is not a basic human a basic human need for the child. The child's first sensitive period will be towards spoken language. So that's one example, and this can manifest in two ways. You have the positive manifestation, and then you have a negative manifestation. So an example of a positive manifestation is language development and development of the child's concentration. But an example of negative manifestation would be when the sensitive period has not been tapped into, and when it has not been allowed to grow or to take its course, because either it was not identified by the caretaker, or it's just, mostly it's because it has not been identified by the caretaker, or maybe the caretaker does not know how to facilitate that in the child. That would be a negative manifestation. So another very important sensitive period would be the sensitive period to order, where the child, and this starts from birth, but the child is prone to a need for order, where and they are comfortable when there is a schedule, they are comfortable when there is a way that things go on. And this is more evident when the child is between the ages of 2 and 3. They need more order in their environment, or if something goes a bit out of schedule, they have a tendency to throw tantrums. And it's because they're uncomfortable with what's going on, and they don't understand, they're unable to comprehend that something is happening at a time when it is not supposed to happen. And then you have the sensitive period of language, where the child is fascinated by the human voice. And you see that even with really small infants, babies, and when you speak to them, when you try and just play with a baby, you see them fascinated by the way your mouth moves, and sometimes you see them trying in their up to their level best to mimic whatever you are trying to say. So when you coo, the baby sometimes coos back as well. So this is coming from a sensitive period of the child's need to learn language. And then another important sensitive period would be one of movement. It is obviously one of, among all of them, they all are really important, but this is also a very key sensitive period for the child, because at birth the child is not able to even hold his head up or do any basic movements, and most of the movements that a child does make are involuntary. But over time, the child is able to coordinate himself. The child is able to reach for something. You have, at certain months, a child, and it differs from child to child, but a child reaches a point where he's able to reach for something, or where he's able to open his mouth to eat his food. These are all sensitive periods. These are all stemming from sensitive periods to movement. And this is something that develops over time. What we need to understand is sensitive periods are exclusive to human beings. They're not something that you would have animals that learn things, but they don't necessarily mean that, as far as studies have shown so far, it does not mean that animals go through sensitive periods as well. But I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. So the most obvious stage of development is between the ages of 0 to 6, as Dr. Montessori has studied. 0 to 6 is where you get the best outcomes. She referred to the child as a blank piece of paper where they are able to absorb anything, and anything you put into them makes such a big impression on them, mostly because their first plane of sensitive periods occurs at this age. So our role as adults, and I think I covered this last session as well, is to learn, to realize, to understand what sensitive periods are, a child's needs, and what we can do to satisfy those needs in a child, and how we can facilitate them to the best of our abilities. So when the environment of the child is not catering to the child's sensitive needs, that's when the child gets frustrated, and because the adult is an obstacle to the child, which ends up resulting in the child being frustrated and quote-unquote naughty. I don't generally like to use that word. I like to use the word active. But you do have a lot of people referring to children as being naughty. And it's not because they want to be naughty. That's not the reason why children act out. It's mostly because they are frustrated and they have no way of expressing themselves in a better way that up to their knowledge. So they express themselves in a way that they feel is the way to be expressed. So the child essentially goes through an internal struggle because their needs for development are not being satisfied, and then and instead, you have adults tell them, this is what you need to do, and you're not supposed to do it this way, but a child has its own way of developing that may not seem the best way for us being adults, but it is the way that the child knows to grow. And it is what the child needs at that time because of the sensitive period that they're going, that may or may not be going unnoticed. So our responsibility at the end of the day is to take advantage of these periods, these sensitive periods, and facilitate it to the best of our knowledge. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about is Dr. Montessori, and I have a really nice chart over here. So she had, and I will share it with you guys once the live is done. So she has shared the stages of development for early learning from birth up till the age of 7. And see, the key reason why Montessori, the Montessori system is mainly focusing on child-led learning is so that, because again, like I said, we may not be able to always identify what the child's sensitive periods are. But if we allow the child, if we give the child a nice prepared environment, the child himself who is going through a sensitive period that we are not able to identify will be able to experiment on their own and do whatever they need to cater to their needs. And as a result, they'll be able to develop their own, like whatever needs that they have, they'll be able to develop it without having, going through something, where going through frustration or having an adult neglect their sensitive period, because the adult might not know what really is going on, or the adult might not, because I mean, everyone's busy, and it does tend to happen. Being a mom, my life does not evolve around solely raising my children. I am also a wife, I am a student, and I have work, and I have so much other things going on. I have a house to run. So it's not a crime to miss that. So presenting the child with a prepared environment can tend to minimize the effects of having missed a sensitive period. So that is why the Montessori classroom is catered the way that it is for the child's self-learning development. So the chart that I was speaking about, so you have the first stage, which is from 0 to 7, which is the main interest in a child would be, the main stage of development, would be the development of movement. And then you have from 0 to, where does this go till? So from 0 to around 3.5, you have a development of mathematical patterns, order, all of that. But then that gradually morphs into from 3.5 up until 7 to actual math. Children love math, which sounds absurd, I know. I personally hate math. But children have a tendency to want to learn more about math, but it has to be presented to them in a suitable way, because you have to go from concrete to abstract, and that's a whole other topic which I'm not going to delve into now. And then you have the development of emotional control, which starts at 0, and when I say 0, I mean from the stage of a newborn, and goes up until 2.5. And then the development of order starts from around 6 months and lasts till 3.5. And then you have the development of, interest in small objects. If you've noticed your toddlers, my son still goes through that. He's 2.5. And he loves teeny tiny things. He loves to eat them. He loves bugs. I spoke about this previously as well. So he is going through the development in interest in small objects, and that starts at the age of 1 and lasts until the age of 3.5. And then you have the development of vocabulary, which starts at the age of 1 and then lasts until 7 years of age. And then you have they have a special need to explore sensation, which starts at 2.5 and lasts till 6.5. And then letter shapes and sounds, which starts from 2.5 and goes until 5. Music, which starts from, so sounds basically, not essentially music, different sounds, how it works. So that starts at 3 and goes up until 7. And then writing, which is a new thing. It's not necessarily a sensitive period, but because everybody writes now, it is something that they are interested in. So that starts at 3.5 and goes up until 6.5. Sorry, that goes until 7. And reading starts at 3 and goes up until the age of 7. And I will share this table. I know it's a bit much to grasp in your head all at once. I will share this table with you guys once it'll be there in my Instagram stories, or I'll probably put up a post about it. But when it comes to, so when you go more in depth into it, when it comes to movement, so children are born with a very limited control of their movement, but over time they rapidly, very quickly, they are able to develop their fine and gross motor skills, and they learn how to use their bodies, they learn how to walk, they learn how to crawl, they learn different things over a period of time. No two children do it the same way at the same time, but they end up doing it at the end of the day, and that's what matters. So during this process, they also are able to develop their cognitive skills. And then you have math. So amazingly, children are born with mathematical minds, and they are born hardwired with a need to understand and learn math, which is just, I mean, it's amazing, and it's a really, really extensive topic, which I really don't want to touch right now. It's going to run way more than the half an hour that I do this segment for. But yes, it's an actual thing. And then you have emotional control, which is another stage of development, where the babies are trying to understand and learn about relationships, communication, emotional control, all of these they want to learn from a very, very young age. And then the need for order, which starts from around 6 months to 3 years. So by the time they turn 6 months, they have gotten used to the order in their life, or the schedule that they are being introduced to. So they need that. By the time they turn 6 months, they understand that this is how my day is going to go. So when things go differently for them, they are uncomfortable. Long journeys with children, it just does not go well. I just traveled here to Riyadh last Thursday, and it really, really did not go too well for us. I thought I was prepared, but I definitely wasn't. The kids were really cranky, really tired, because they are not used to what's going on around them, and it's justifiable because it's a change for them, and children they do tend to be comfortable with their routine and what's going on, what they know with the familiar. And my daughter was fine. My son was a bit more uncomfortable, and that just is how children work. So they have an innate need for order, and it comes from a deep psychological need, and it is not always recognizable by their adults or by their caretaker. But yeah, like I said, when put in a situation that they are uncomfortable with, they do tend to behave differently and to show their discomfort. And but according to Dr. Montessori and all of the students, they have proven again and again that once they set their standard, the child's internal desire for order has been activated, and they are used to that way of doing things. And change from that would be again difficult for the child. So any tantrums that most tantrums that we would, this is aside from hunger or all of those, but tantrums that we would observe with regards to this is because they are uncomfortable with their routine being, with their sense of order being disrupted. And then you have their interest in small objects, where children between the ages of 1 and 4, They are obsessed because they're going through a sensitive period to small objects. So this actually, and we might not realize it, this ends up resulting in development of fine and gross motor skills because of their ability to use their grasp. Sorry. Yeah, so this lays down the roots for eventually being able to hold a pencil and write. So we might not realize how such a simple, mundane thing can have such can lay the foundation for something as important as writing later on in their lives. And then we have vocabulary, where again the child comes into this world hardwired to learn language. They learn from a very early age. They attempt to try and learn languages. And it's because of that children under the age of 6 years old are able to grasp language much more easily. And that's why they say that children between the ages of 0 to 6 can grasp up to 13 languages at the same time. And then you have, children at a very early age, they are more prone to understanding things that are presented to them in a concrete method. So because they like to explore through their sensations, their sense of touch, their 5 basic senses. And so when you present to them an activity like, let's say, math, and it's more hands-on, it's more concrete, so then the child is able to understand more. And that is why you have the Montessori activity. You have the number rods, you have the pink stairs, you have the pink tower, the broad stairs. So you have these activities that progress initially from concrete activities and gradually moves on to abstract. So that way the child is able to understand numbers and the values of numbers, because we have a lot of, I think, 2 friends of mine, 2 really close friends of mine, in the course of the past week, message me and tell me that they have children who know numbers, they've memorized the numbers, but they don't understand the value of it, and that usually is a reason why, because they are unable to understand what the value of the number is, because they've been memorizing the numbers first. But if the numbers are presented to them in a concrete approach first, then it's more easier for them to grasp the abstract version, because you have to progress from concrete to abstract, not abstract to concrete. So that's one of the main reasons why this tends to happen with school-going kids. Schools don't always do the concrete to abstract method. And then you have letters, shapes, and sounds. So children become very interested in the way a letter looks like, the sounds that they make, and this between the ages of 2.5 to 5, they love activities like where they trace over different textures. Hence, you have the sandpaper letters, sandpaper numbers as well, and these activities cater to the child's need to explore letters and sounds using their sense of touch. So, and then you have the development of music or sounds, where they like to learn different sounds, different pitches, different melodies, rhythms. And then you have the sound box for that. That's also a Montessori activity. So this develops their brain, leads to academic, social, and emotional growth. So there's always, if you are a person, like I'm Muslim, and if you are a person who comes from an environment where you like to avoid music, then that's perfectly fine as well. And you can always cater the activities accordingly for the child. And then you have reading and writing, which is like a key thing, a key development stage for the child. And this is about basically preparing the child's mind, and because they are open to information at a particular time. So when you are giving them lessons or materials or activities that are ready for them, learning to read comes naturally. So initially, a child is always, in a Montessori environment, a child is always introduced to writing before reading. So they first learn, you have the sandpaper letters where they're not necessarily holding up a pen or a pencil, but they are writing with their fingers. And that is still considered writing. It does not necessarily mean they have to put pen on paper to be able to write. So eventually, by learning the sounds of the letters that they are tracing, the child is able to make the sounds and then join sounds together, and then it ends up with them being able to read naturally. It's not something that you have to put an additional effort for them to be able to learn. So because in a Montessori environment, the child chooses materials based on what they are interested in. If a child is going through a sensitive period to the alphabets, the child is not going to go and choose something that they're not interested in, like, let's say, math. If a child is interested in math, they're not going to choose something related to language because they're not interested in it. It's like, if you go into a bookstore, it's a very, it's not the same example, but to get a better understanding, it's like you as an adult going to a bookstore and you are more interested in dystopian fiction. You're not going to go pick up a romance novel. Nicholas Sparks is not going to be entertaining to you because that is not where your interests lie. And you can be dependent on to not choose a romance novel. And that's essentially, when it boils down, that's essentially what it means. So that's all I have for today. It's been like half an hour, and I try to limit our segments to half an hour. And thank you guys for watching. So I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Assalamu alaikum.